We're going to have a wonderful time today. Why are we going to have a wonderful time? Because this is going to be an unorthodox approach at GGBC. We're going to get some insight on a fellow member that has never been revealed publicly before, ever. Let me give you some highlights. We're going to find out today how Susan RoAne's mother escaped getting whacked during a real-life mafia hit. We're going to find out about Susan's first taste of a legit shakedown in elementary school. We're going to also find out about how the legendary Mayor Daley I influenced Susan's leadership style. And then we're going to also understand terms such as putting thumbs on the scale, kickbacks, and payoffs. Now, just to remind you all of these things that we're going to learn today help to prepare Susan to become a grade school teacher in San Francisco. So this is a journey of epic proportions. Susan is obviously an American author and speaker. She has several business networking books, including How to Work a Room. She was born Susan Rosenberg in Chicago and graduated from Mather High School in 1963. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a master's degree from San Francisco State University. So she's got both sides of the U.S. covered. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and mentor, Susan RoAne. Hello, Susan.
Hello, and I love the unorthodox because, my grandfather was Orthodox, so it's quite a twist.
So, Susan, this whole idea came about from a conversation that we had not too long ago about handling difficult people. And with regards to that, you had mentioned something to the effect of, don't make me go Chicago on you, right? And I said, that sounds like a great title for a book.
And that was it. I never heard it until you said it. And I went, oh, that is. And then you said, that's got to be the title of your talk. So I've been collecting those Chicago stories.
Well, I love it. So let's set the scene here. Let's get to the first story because we have very limited time for this, and we have so many fun stories to share. I want to set the scene at the house with your mother just before a very challenging incident happened, we'll say. And in the I think it was the morning, your mother was near the lobby. Can you talk about this story? Let's get right into it.
Let me tell you, this is what happens when people wonder why I have some of the attitudes I did. I was about 8 or 9 when I learned about the mob. And Mother told this story because she was always so grateful. It always made her believe there was a heavenly person, because Mother used to live in a building. Back in the day, people didn't live by themselves when they were single. They lived with family. She lived with Aunt Tilly in a building, and she was the manager of the Katz's exclusive millinery in the Palmer House. She'd come home every night, and every night she'd see one of the neighbors, whom she called Zookie, no relation to the now famous Hoodie Zookie, and they would meet in what they called the vestibule. He would open up his paper and look at the headlines. We had 4 papers at the time in Chicago, and she would get the mail. And she told me, oh, he was just so lovely. He was so nice, because he'd always say to her, oh, Lily, you look lovely today. How are you? This would happen every night after work. And one day, her sister Bertie said, you have to come for dinner and see your nieces. Oh, my mother said, okay. So she didn't go home. She went around the corner to Aunt Bertie's house. As she came back, she saw police cars and an ambulance, heard sirens. What happened? Well, Zookie was, as we say, taken out. He apparently was, my mother always thought he was a good salesperson, but he was a little too ambitious for his employer, who happened to be the mob. And he went into someone else's beer territory, and they snuffed him. So I said to my mother, I said, when I was writing How to Create Your Own Luck, I started as You Never Know book. That story was the basis for You Never Know, serendipity. You weren't there. That had to be good. And I said to my mom, I need the details. She goes, well, I'm getting old. I don't remember. And I said, they fact check. So she had all the details. And I did at the end say to her, Ma, what would have happened had you gone home for dinner that night? Would you have been hurt? And my mother said, what are you talking about? It wasn't a revolver, bang. It was a machine gun. Of course I would have been dead. So Mother, by going to Aunt Bertie's, managed not to get snuffed out when the mafia took out Zucky. And to let you know how I learned about you take care of your employees, they still took care of his family, who still could live in the building, because just because they had to kill him didn't mean his family should suffer.
I love this story. And, this is part of Susan's charm. What makes Susan uniquely Susan, and Susan is very unique. She's a character. We love her, and she tells it like it is. And talk about making your own luck. That's a tremendous story about making your own luck. Now, you applied some of these concepts of what you learned in elementary school. And something kind of happened during elementary school in which you had to perhaps kind of maybe influence somebody, let's say.
I'm an influencer.
Susan is one of the original social influencers. And we're going to get into this concept of influence with regarding a shakedown that happened in elementary school. Could we talk about that?
Oh, yes. And I wish she could be here today, but she had other plans. My partner in crime, Pam Masarski, and we were in 8th grade, and we had to shake down everyone in our class for money. So what we did is we just simply got a hold of everyone in our class and said, show up with $2 tomorrow. Well, a couple people said that they couldn't because of allowance. So we kind of fronted for them, which means we shook down our own parents for the money, but everyone paid back, and everyone came with their $2. So it was my first lesson is, this is what we have to do. This is what it'll cost you. You better show up with money. So that was 8th grade. I guess I was about 13 and a half. Oh, everyone had their bar mitzvah money by then. Maybe they all did pay. I don't know. But shaking people down, but it was for a cause. I want all my Breakfast Club members and my guests and friends know this was for a good reason. So sometimes you have to use a tactic that the end result is good. And the reason was this: we were in 8th grade and Richard Grossman's father passed away. And what we learned in our community and what we did is we made sure that we supplied a meal for the family. So what we called it back in Chicago is we sent a tray. And that meant you went to the deli and you ordered and paid for a tray so that the family had food and didn't even have to think about it at this time of morning. So it was really for a good cause. And how we learned this is what we learned through our community, our faith. What we did is you support, you do what you have to do. So we did what we had to do. We made everyone give us money.
And you talked about this a little bit with regards to a vital lesson with regards to respect, how important respect is in Chicago, and how we'll talk a little bit about shifts between Chicago and San Francisco life. Could you talk a little bit about respect, because that was certainly came to mind with regards to that story.
Well, there's something that I learned, and I learned here by seeing less of it. And it was called how we pay respects. In Chicago, you pay respect. You show up, doesn't matter what religion you are, if someone's being honored at a wake, at a mass, at a shiva, you show up. And that's what I learned growing up. And it served me in Chicago because, Patricia will remember when we saw the original Candyman, the horror flick in '92. And while we were scared about the movie, I was scared because they were walking through the Cabrini Green Homes, the path I took when I was teaching to walk to the local storefront church with some of my students to pay respects, because one of our fathers was killed. One of our students' dads was killed for literally $5. And I said, it was lunchtime. I said to the kids, who's going to go with me? And 10 kids didn't eat their lunch, neither did I. And we showed up at the church and we paid our respects to Joan Oliver and her family. But the interesting thing about paying respects is the teacher representative for our school came behind me and whispered in my ear at the church, "Thank you so much for coming. I've been the parent liaison for 10 years. The same thing happened to my husband 2 years ago, and nobody from the school showed up." So the lesson I learned is you show up. You pay the call, you do whatever you have to do to show your regard. And I think that's a little different here. I don't see it as much. I know I've gone to a couple of different masses in San Jose and people were shocked I showed up, and I go, but that's what you do. And that's the lesson I learned in my community. And I really learned it in Chicago. And how I know it's different is when I still am the executor of my dear neighbor's estate. When we went to the funeral parlor, I went in San Rafael, the guy was from Chicago. And he told me he saw the difference in the concept of showing respects. And I'll tell you something, I think in terms of what we call networking or relationships, showing respects for people in their time of loss is so important and is never forgotten.
Well, we'll talk about the idea of showing respect and being a member of the community. There is probably no more famous member of the Chicago community than Mayor Daley, the original. And we'd love to have you share a story about a little bit of a leadership style that you learned from Mayor Daley, if you would.
Mayor Daley was, he looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You know, he was a little stout. And here's a lesson that I learned, and we thought about it yesterday during the Giants game because I was having pain. And Mayor Daley was excellent at customizing his communication. And it's a fancy way of saying he was a graduate attorney. He spoke eloquently when that was what was called for, but he also knew how to speak to the unions, the masses, the people. I think he could talk in what I call the bear English, and that's different, but he knew how to play to the audience. It's something I did in teaching. You don't talk to fourth graders the same way you talk to eighth graders. You don't talk to a 4-year-old the same way you talk to a 40-year-old or an 84-year-old. Customized communication. And I think that is a great sign of wisdom and leadership. And by the way, I can do a little, what about them bears? And so I can do that too. I've often teased that when I was introduced by one of my actually grammar school and high school pals, he would say to me, "Hey, Suze, meet so-and-so." Well, that's what you did. You didn't need eloquent introductions. You just did what someone told you to do because you knew what would happen if you didn't.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your, you had mentioned this concept, speaking of Mayor Daley, about putting your thumbs on the scale and this phrase, putting your thumbs on the scale. And we're talking about kickbacks and payoffs and so on here. What does it mean to put your thumbs on the scale?
Well, I think it originally started at the butcher shops where all the old women would buy their ossobuco, their kosher meat, their whatever. And then they'd pick up the package and it was so light. So they thought that the butcher had his thumb on the scale when he was calculating. I think that's the origin. But to me, I've often, because of the politics of Chicago, when something happens now and it doesn't feel right and it's fishy, I know someone's thumb is on the scale. And I said this, and I know I said it to Lana, when Justice Kennedy retired early in July. I said, "Oh, I wonder whose thumb is on the scale." 2 weeks later, we find out whose thumb is on the scale and why he retired early. So what I've learned, Antonio, is that when I have the inner suspicion that something, and we could just call it unkosher, fishy, somebody's thumb is on the scale. And I've learned now that in order to find out whose thumb it is, follow the money. And kickbacks.
So it's non-gefiltered.
It's not. I know a whole group here now is laughing at that. Yes, it's non-gefiltered, and we won't even translate that. An acquired taste, to be sure.
That's right.
In terms of kickbacks, I remember going to my first exercise class here in Marin. She goes, "We're going to do kickbacks." And I'm like thinking, someone's paying someone off. I didn't know that that was an exercise. Kickbacks, that to me is what I grew up with. And I know my friends from Chicago are here. Maybe I internalized more of it, but greasing someone's palm with silver, the kickbacks, we're going to recommend this, and then a little money comes in. And it happens here in San Francisco all the time. There is a contracting firm that gets a lot of business here in Marin. How did they get all this business? Who's at the helm? What's going on? Dig a little deeper, you'll find out. Yes, and pay off.
We talked about that a little bit, because the idea is the distinction between Chicago-style politics and San Francisco-style politics. You had mentioned that Chicago-style politics is in your face, it's obvious, it's very clear. Here, you had a different opinion.
Oh, yeah. That's when I was teaching. I was a substitute teacher, and I would call in every day, and lovely Florence McGinn at 6 a.m. would give me a school to go to, which I went to on buses. And
wait, hold on. Let's not do that. Let's not go there yet.
Oh.
Before we go there, I want to go back to the school in Chicago, the Cabrini Greens school over there. And I want you to share with us a little bit about what it was like teaching there.
Oh, well, it was, if any of you watched.
And were you just a new teacher?
No, it was my second year of teaching.
Okay,
I went
perfect.
to the Cabrini Green Jenner School. There were 100 teachers. It was a very big school. And if you don't know about the Cabrini Green, if you ever watched the TV show Good Times, it was from allegedly Cabrini Green. The writer was a Cabrini Green person. It's where the teachers were considered, you could aim at the teachers, etc. Well, it was quite the school. I had one student that came back after lunch with something, a little object. And of course, it was contraband. So I confiscated it, brought it to the vice principal, and he said, "You actually took this away from James Sandifer?" And I said, "Well, yes, he wasn't supposed to have it." He goes, "It's a zip gun. What were you doing picking up a zip gun?" I had no idea. I had never seen it. It was challenging. Those were very challenging times. But I thought it would be great if I imitated the teacher next door, because they seemed to like her. She had been a sister, and now she was sister. They still called her Sister Eleanor. And then one day, one of the biggest kids in class said to me, "Ms. R, lock the door. I don't want her in here." And I said, "Really?" And apparently she did things like little guilt trips that didn't work for them. And I complied and locked the door. And you know what? It changed everything, but it changed me. Because I thought if I imitated this teacher that seemed to have like a holy image, that I'd be a better teacher. But I wasn't. I was a terrible teacher. But as soon as I said to the kids, "I'm locking the door and it's you and me, guys," I took on my own personality. I owned my humor. I owned my background. I finally said to the kids, "You're going to be tested against those 6th grade kids all over the city and up the North Shore. You have a choice. I'm going to let you vote, but it's tomorrow. You have to think about it. Would you like me to teach you how to take a test?"
Let's go into that for a second, because what led up to that? There were some issues with the kids in the class here, and you're a little concerned if they're going to be able to get ahead in these tests. Can you give us a little bit of a lead up to that discussion about the vote?
Oh, well, one of the counselors and I had a little talk, and she let me know, this is in Chicago style, that if I promised not to say anything, she would let me have one of the tests so I could help the students learn how to take the test. And what was amazing, she wanted nothing in return from me, no kickbacks. What she wanted was the students to achieve. So that was a role model for me. And I said, if she wants them to achieve, then I can rise to the occasion. And by the way, I did not have an education degree. I am a double major, English and history. which only means any night you could watch Jeopardy and get some of the questions. And I had to take my teaching classes after school, but I did do what she said, but I decided to let them vote. I guess I still always and still do support democracy. And that was.
But this situation, though, Susan, is a little unusual because this school was tough. This was a tough school.
Oh, yeah.
We know what tough schools are, but when you require some police protection to get into the school through the area and you need some police protection to get in and out, can we talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Like the time I was called into the principal's office.
Right.
I forgot that I told you this. I was called into the principal's office and I was like 23 or 22. I was like, oh my God, I was called in the principal's office. And she was angry at me because I walked into Jenner School from Division Street. And she looked at me and she said, I can't guarantee your safety. And I thought, yes, we did have some guards, not like they have today. But she arranged for another teacher to drive me into the school from the bus stop because she couldn't guarantee my safety because there were, people took pot shots at you. You were considered some of the decoys. Those were what I affectionately call the bad old days. So that does make you a little aware. But you know what, Tony, I still walked across that path, the Candyman path, because I decided that I was doing maybe naively, I was doing the right thing and I would be protected. But yes, those were some scary days. But by the way, the kids did vote. They wanted me to teach them. And that's all I needed. And someday I have this fantasy that I'm going to get to see that class. They were very dear to me. There's this 6th grade class. Oh, I will tell you one story. They had different ambitions than I did. I wanted to teach them reading and English or whatever. And little James Sandifer, who was like 4'9" and so tough, because when you're 4'9" or 4'11", you have to be tough. He said to me, I don't have to learn how to read. Why not? I'm going to be a pimp. And then it was as if my grandfather's humor trickled down to me when I said to him, James, if you're going to be a pimp, you want to be a rich pimp. In order to be a rich pimp, you have to know how to read because they're all out at the track and they can read the green sheets. And if you don't know how to read, you can't do that and you won't be rich. And so he would sit next to me while kids were doing other assignments. And I helped him learn to read from the green sheet. And the green sheet in the Chicago papers were the sports, not just the sports, but the track. So if someone says they want to learn how to gamble, you teach them from whatever they'll have to read to learn to gamble. That's the lesson that I learned.
Think about how much better education would be if we could have an approach where students could learn how to read and do math and so on based upon subjects that they love rather than how it's dictated to kids today. We'd be so much further ahead. I love that story, Susan. All right, so let's get to your trip to San Francisco. What brought you to San Francisco? What year was this? What led you to come to San Francisco?
It was 1970, and it's San Francisco. Need I say more? I came out and visited it in April, and it was beautiful and weather. Moved here in July, and I had to go buy a winter coat. I was freezing. But I did transfer some of my lessons from Chicago in terms of teaching, because when I was teaching at Everett Middle School the last year, I took all the kids upstairs to the library. I said, we need to sit on the floor and talk. What do you need to tell me why you want to learn to read? And what I found out is number one is they wanted to drive. And so I went to the DMV on Fell Street and got 30 of those driver ed books because they are consumable, they have pictures, and they have words that the kids knew so they could sound them out, like pedestrian. Believe it or not, the kid that was reading at 3rd grade level could sound that word out because they knew what a pedestrian was. So I used those consumable books to teach reading. Fast forward 20 years, Teacher of the Year, that was the story they used about her. And I'm going, hey, did it before she did.
But let's talk about before you actually had that story, you actually need to find a job. And you had a story here about applying some kickbacks, so to speak, to getting your job in the city.
Well, as I was saying, as I was a substitute teacher, I finally said I really wanted to get a long-term substitute to turn to a permanent position. And I really did love Florence McGinn. And one day we're on the phone, I said, Mrs. McGinn, I really would like to be a teacher. Could you tell me who I need to pay off to get a job? It said with such sincerity, because that's how I thought it worked. And she said, Susan, that's not how it works in San Francisco. And this is what I've told people the lesson was. You know what? It does work that way. In Chicago, you know who the piper is. You know what you have to pay the piper, and you know what will happen to you if you don't. And it does. In San Francisco, you still have to pay off someone. You may not know who it is. There will be something that will happen to you, and it does. So I'm from the school of I rather know whose palm I have to cross with silver and avoid getting whacked than getting whacked because I would have done it, but you didn't tell me who it was.
So what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yes, that's exactly.
Very
I compliment of you.
So Susan, we can end this talk with a very famous, our very beloved Herb Caen. And there's a story that you have, and you were written up in Herb Caen's famous article. And this is particularly for Rick Wilson, who is our resident writer, and Bill Buchanan here. I'll appreciate that. Tell us your Herb Caen story.
Okay, first of all, I got many people in Herb Caen, including my ex-husband, Patricia Fripp, several other friends, but I had a number of items in Herb Caen, one of which was I was reading the catalog from the old Emporium. So a lot of you remember the Emporium stores. And I saw a gadget, a tchotchke that cracked me up. It was a Tuna Turner on sale for $11.99. I'm from Chicago. You turn the can over and that's how you get the water out. I didn't know you had to buy something to put in a drawer that you could get the water out. But what I did is I cut it all out and I put it on, scotch taped it to a paper. It almost sounds like a ransom note. Anyway, and I sent it to Herb Caen, the picture and the ad, and I wrote, and he used this item. He prefaced it with, Susan RoAne has a dynamite sense of humor, which I've used in my marketing for years, because what I wrote was, do you think this Tuna Turner used to be married to Ike?
There you go. Ike and Tuna Turner. I get it. It's very well done. Very well done. Well, folks, we have ended exactly at 8:30, which gives us an opportunity here for some Q&A. We have topics that we can talk about: the best hot dogs, how you should eat a hot dog, the White Sox, versus other teams here, the Giants here, and we're going to open up for some Q&A. But Susan, I want to thank you so very much here for your time today. So much fun. Who has some questions for our wonderful Susan RoAne? And you guys can just unmic here. That's okay. Here. And Craig, Mr. President.
Thanks, Antonio, and thank you, Susan. What an entertaining interview. I enjoyed it. And so it's not so much of a question as much as it is an observation, because in my life, I look back and I think of, what I could have done differently, what opportunities I may have missed. But one definitely that I missed, which you highlighted, was how to read a green sheet. I have been wondering that, and I just man, I wish he was my teacher. I would have gone so much further ahead in life. So you've solved that mystery. So thank you.
And we have Patricia.
Yes, Susan, I know you had a wonderful relationship with many of your students, including one we went and saw at the Punchline. Would you tell that story and what he said to you?
Oh, yes. Matt Weinhold was my student here at Clarendon Elementary School. And then I began to read that he was doing comedy. He was like the opening act, etc. So Patricia and I went to see him. And this was when he was beginning. So he was the opening, which meant you were like the third in line. And when he finished his set, I walked out and I saw him and I grabbed his arm. It was dark. He couldn't see me. And I said, Matthew, step outside. And he jumped outside of the door. And before then, when we walked in, I said to whoever was taking the tickets, I gave Matthew Weinhold his start. And the woman said, oh, did you own a comedy club? I said, no, I was his 5th grade language arts teacher. But here's what Matthew said to me. Oh, Mrs. RoAne. He still called me that. Mrs. RoAne, oh my goodness. First of all, this is why I still love him. The first thing he said 20 years later was, you look exactly the same. I taught him well. Then we talked and he said something to me I have never forgotten. And I think it's when you have a student with humor, you don't put it down, you encourage it. And he said to me, because when he was funny, I laughed. And he said to me, you know, Mrs. Rand, sometimes I thought there were only the two of us in the room. And we went and saw him, Patricia, I think he came in 3rd in the comedy competition, but he won #1 in Seattle. And we're still in touch. And he's still adorable.
All right. So as we're waiting for other questions, if you have other questions, let me know here. Oh, Bill has a question.
Great presentation, Suzanne. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
Susan, thanks very much. As you were speaking, all these memories were flowing back from Chicago because I served as a special agent of the FBI from 71 until late 73, 3 years. And I'm thinking, wow, this is great. You've triggered all kinds of great memories. But here we roll into town in 71. My wife has really never left California. She was born in San Francisco. And so we settled into a little townhouse south of, it was called Chicago Heights in that area, you know, about 30 miles south on the Illinois Central Railway and all that kind of stuff. And so I was getting checked into the office, you know, which is at the Federal Building down there, and Everett Dirksen Federal Building. And she was at home, you know, we're getting unpacked and getting settled into our little townhouse. Here comes the telephone guy, and he's setting up all the telephones. And then she tells me later, he's telling her all about how they packed the ballot boxes for the latest election. I don't know, he's so proud of this, you know, $10 a piece, and we got them all. And so she was very careful about not letting him know that I was a special agent. So that, you know, anyway, I ended up, I did not work organized crime. They had a special squad for that. I was working interstate thefts at the Belt Railway, which you may remember, served the Chicago area and actually served the whole nation. Trains came in from everywhere. And they were just ripping off whole trailer loads of stuff. But there was one guy that I arrested. His name was Sam Bills. And all I wanted was a handwriting exemplar from him because I had a document which would nail him, you know. He took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, here's a little guy. He was a wise guy, but he wasn't one of the top guys, you know. And so anyway, we had a lot of adventures there. I could go on and on, but Cabrini Green and Altgeld Gardens was another one we kind of stayed away from unless you were on the fugitive squad. Anyway, thanks for kicking off all those memories, Susan.
Oh, there are just so many. I can remember, and I know my brother's here. There were many people that when they got stopped for a traffic stop, behind their license, there was a $5 bill, and then it went to a $10 bill. And I don't know if it ever went to a 20, and I'm sure you're not supposed to do it, but that's how you got out of getting parking tickets. Oh, I will tell you this story because we talked about it in my high school group. As you would expect, my grammar school girls meet once a month that I started on Zoom, and my high school group meets every other month, and they corrected me. Here's my memory from high school. What you said about stealing off of a train. Oh, besides the cousin Morty did that and had a fencing business, ended up in prison. That's another story. But when I was in high school, there was a big fencing ring that made it in the newspapers. It was broken up, etc. and it was from our local Summerdale police station. The police were the fencing ring. So pardon me if I have a skewed view of things.
Love it. We can have a whole story just with Bill and Susan for another. We might have to work that out. So Francine Ward had a question. Francine.
Thank you. Good morning. It's more of a comment. Two things. First, I love you so much, and you know that. We've been friends for over 25 years, and you were the first person who actually encouraged me to incorporate my law practice into my speaking when I was speaking. I had never thought of that. And, you know, you really pushed me into that. And that was great. I really celebrate that even today. But you know what you really did for me this morning? You know, talking about being a teacher, and I think you know, my favorite teacher was my third grade teacher. I loved Myra Goldstein so much. She recently passed away. She was at my graduation from college, from law school. She was at my wedding, you know, and I used to go to New York every other month. When I would see my mom, I'd also go see her. And she died right before my husband in 2019. But you brought memories back. She was so wonderful. And thank God I had a teacher like that who really cared. And I was a trouble kid, as you know, but she just, you know, she was there. And so thank you for making me remember how important teachers are. Unfortunately, we treat them like stepchildren. You know, even today, we don't give teachers the respect that they really deserve. And I thank you for being such a great teacher.
Well, thank you, my dear. And I remember we've talked about Myra, but I will tell you this, he's not here with us. He's a little more frail, but I am still in touch with Burl Covan, my high school English teacher. And when How to Work a Room first came out, I called him. I had the book under me as if I was breastfeeding. I had the book under my left, you know, oh my God, my book is here. And I called him and I said, oh, Burl, I did it. We did it. We wrote a book. And I'll never forget, he said, Susan, you knew how to write before you even came to high school. But, you know, he would visit us in San Francisco. I would visit him. The last time I was in Chicago 2 times ago, went to visit him. So really, I think we need to remember our teachers. And I think the reason I like George Lucas, besides that he built a park in San Anselmo, is it had to be 20 years ago. He won, I think, the Hirschholt Award at one of the award shows. And what he said is, this is a thank you to that 5th grade teacher who whispered words of encouragement in the ears of a boy who had different and strange ideas. So for me, that he acknowledged his 5th grade teacher, mine was Mrs. Kurtz, and Miss Gagan is one of my passwords, but I won't tell you to what, my 3rd grade teacher. Thank you, Francine. Anyone else have a mafia story?
Any other questions here? All right, let's gonna get into this real quick here regarding karma and baseball. Shall we have a quick little discussion about that? No Cub fan speaks of karma.
Oh yes. Oh, and I do have it here, and I'm going to have to read it to you because we found this as I was redoing my office. So this was a number of years ago. There was an article we reproduce things to send them out to people, but this was an article about the karma of the Cub fan.
And this was from C.W. Nevius, right?
C.W. Nevius wrote a whole article about the karma of the Cub fan. And I had to write a letter to the Sporting Green. In fact, I once had a colleague who said, Susan, if I want to keep up with you, I just read letters to the editors and make newspapers and magazines. So here's my, those aren't my reading glasses. Excuse me. This is my letter to the editor after C.W. Nevis wrote about the karma of the Cub fan. And I know a couple of Cub fans here are ongoing. Oh, they're going to throw up hearing that. Editor, C.W. Nevius's Sporting Green column of October 6 captured the essence and spirit of those of us who are longtime Cub fans. Then I read the title, The Karma of the Cub Fan? Really? Who gave it that title? A native Californian caught by the alliteration rather than the appropriateness? No Cub fan talks of karma. That is strictly California. like putting sprouts on a corned beef sandwich. Let one who has spent many times in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, which by the way, I took Brother Ira, forewarn writers and readers, it would not be a healthy thing to do around a Cub fan and those bleachers to talk about karma.
There you go. There you go. I want to go back to what Bill had said regarding the Cabrini Greens school. I don't think that I added enough emphasis on how tough that was. Bill just said not too long ago that you had to be on a special challenging assignment for the FBI to have to go to Cabrini Greens, and that's where Susan was doing her teaching. So that just shows what a tough individual she is, and to have such great humor. How your humor must pull you through these very challenging and difficult situations here. Is it something that you rely on quite a bit, Susan?
Well, first of all, my mother was a great storyteller, as you could tell by Zucky, which he started to say, don't ask his daughter where the father is. So my mother was a great storyteller. Her father, Archie Cohn, we used to say he was funnier than Myron Cohn. For those of you that remember Borscht Belt comedians, my grandfather was a storyteller. What I learned from him is that when he didn't think his grandchildren understood or had great humor, so he would smile and laugh at the punchline. And I've learned that if you're telling a story that's supposed to be funny, your face should actually show and cue people when it's supposed to be funny. It was a very tough school, but I did handle it with humor. And I am going to tell the story. We're still recording. I once had this written on my board. Oh no, they scratched it into my car. Mizar is a hoe, H-O. Scratched it into my car. Well, I decided to turn that at the Cabrini Green Home Jenner School into a spelling lesson. So I wrote it on the board and I said, can you please tell me to the class what this word is? And they are fainting. They could write it, but that I should say it. I said, could you open your dictionaries and let's look up, oh, is that a saying Santa Claus would say? Oh, did you mean that gardening tool? Well, you left off the E. And then one of the kids whispered and said, Mizar meant whore. And I said the word out loud, blasted the word whore, and I wrote it on the board. And I said, didn't I teach you about the diphthongs and that how you were to pronounce this, and that in some words, the E at the end means you pronounce the final consonant. I never had anything written on the board or cars again. And I watched these kids, some of whom had brothers in the Peastone Nation and the Jipper and Cobras, slink into their chairs, embarrassed that I would say that word. And I'm going, oh, thank goodness the principal wasn't walking the halls to see that I wrote the bad word on the board. You have to have some, yes, a lot of humor and I think it's a lot of grit. And I think you have to care about the students or the audience. And that's what I have learned all the way along. If you care that that group there gets what they need, how you get to it allows you to be imaginative.
I just want to say hello to Ann Mahoney. Thank you for joining us today here, and to Linda Shively. And thank you, Douglas, for returning back here. And Andy, is it Cahuste?
And I
Antonio, I don't see where to raise my hand.
Oh no, I'm just saying hello. Just saying hello.
I'm a girl from Chicago, and I think we all have the same question of Susan of, this is going to be another book, isn't it?
Well, funny you should say that. I did decide during the pandemic that I didn't write a book, I didn't learn a language, and I didn't learn how to make sourdough bread, because why would I live here? But Antonio knows I've said to him, as I've collected story after story after story, and even brought the index cards for my first speeches to the San Francisco School Board, 3 of my speeches. By the way, the attorney for the San Francisco School Board was Irving Breyer, is in Father of Justice. Just thought I'd throw that in. I said to one of the emails, I said, Antonio, I'm thinking this might be, it has an essence of how to work a room and secrets of savvy networking, but it really is how I've lived my life. And that's why I'm blessed to have friends in this room from college and grammar school and et cetera, is I've always felt this, that if you meet people that you like, you don't let them go. You stay in touch. Even if you have to make 3 calls to their one or send 4 emails to their text, good people, I said it this way, I have Velcro in my veins. I will stick to you if you're good people and give kickbacks.
Patricia, did you have another topic, a question? Oh no, I think she just jumped off the phone. Okay, any other questions? Janice, question for you.
Of course, I loved every story, Susan, and I've heard some of them before. For those who don't know, I originally met Susan in the 80s when we both served at the San Francisco Chamber Small Business Committee, back when they knew what they were doing. Ha, ha, ha. Susan, tell the story about how getting laid off was one of the best things that ever happened to you. Getting laid off from the school district.
Yes, it was. Thank you. Yes, I was laid off when San Francisco laid off 1,200 teachers. I was one of them, but my then husband and I were one of the 7 couples who were laid off. The difference is I was Susie Sunshine. So when people would call me, I'd say, well, you could do this. You're so good at that. You could do this. And then all of a sudden, as my friends would say, no, I can't. I realized you have to take people through a process. So what I did is I started to design a career change workshop for teachers so we could find out what we could do, because George Bernard Shaw said, those who can do and those who can't teach, which is utter crap. Because most of the successful people I know were former teachers. By the way, Madeleine Albright, and just to throw in case it's on Jeopardy, Sting was a teacher. He was not a music teacher. He was an English teacher. Just thought I'd let
Take
you
it
know.
easy. Take it easy.
I just want people to, when I know that someone is a former teacher, I know that they do something that I do, which is, I would say, if I'm a success at all in business, this is it. We never go to sleep at night without having everything we need for the next day lined up at the door.
Bill, do you think Susan would have made a great Marine?
I don't think I would have wanted to go through boot camp with her.
I don't know that I would. Well, the one thing, if they put me on KP duty, you would never want me to be the person in the kitchen.
I think you'd be on the front line, quite frankly. But I don't know. That's just me.
But I talk my way out of it. I would keep my way out of it.
You get to the front line, you go to the enemy, say, you're wearing that?
I've talked my friends out of getting tickets, because here's what you do. One time I was leaving Candlestick, which I love dearly, with a friend after a Giants game, and he went this way, and a policeman flagged him down that he could get a ticket. And he was like getting so high. And I said to him, don't you talk, let me handle this. I said, oh, officer, you can't give him a ticket. I said, he was listening to me. I pretended we were a couple. And I said, if you give him a ticket, you know what? He'll never listen to another thing I tell him to do. And the officer started to laugh and said, oh my God, you remind me of my mother-in-law. And he didn't give us a ticket. So sometimes if you make someone laugh and not putting them down. So I'm going to say this about humor. In Chicago, there was a lot of jib-jabbing. Some of you guys do that. That's male humor. When I studied humor at the Humor Library in San Francisco, before I wrote How to Work Room, I learned that the observational humor is more female, but it's also now become more common. And what I've learned is if you make people laugh, but here's what I've said about humor, it's never at the expense of someone else, a group, whether it's about religion, race, whatever, weight, height. And I learned this from one of my grammar school classmates, Marlene Gordon. And I'll never forget this. She said, you cannot tease anyone or make fun of anyone or poke fun of anyone of something they can't change like that. So I can't change being short. So keep your damn short jokes to yourself. But I changed my hair. Or actually, I stopped.
It looks amazing, by the way. We love it.
Thank you.
Any other questions here for
Yeah.
Betty?
Antonio, Susan, this has been absolutely delightful. It's so nice to hear you speak and not just in little quips when we introduce ourselves on the Breakfast Club. I admire your wisdom, your sense of humor, and I think probably most importantly, being positive, of course, but also your ability to be connected and stay connected with people from your past. It is absolutely critical and so special. And I like what you said about your email responses to a text and you reaching out. It's not one and one. Who cares how many times you've had somebody over for dinner? Have them over, whether they reciprocate or not. It doesn't make any difference. So I admire what you have just said and your wisdom. I do have to tell you a Chicago story that I was having lunch with my brother-in-law in Scottsdale. And we were having these famous Chicago hot dogs, whatever they are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And there was another couple sitting near us who were friends of Jim's. And I, of course, put ketchup on my hot dog.
Oh, no.
I know. And that's the reaction I got. I will never live it down. And they said, you cannot eat that hot dog with ketchup on it. So I just had to share that story.
There is a sign at O'Hare that, because one of my grammar school and high school friends started Super Dogs, but it's always Vienna hot dog. And I don't do the neon relish, but I only deli mustard, never yellow mustard. There's a sign that says, no ketchup on hot dog, considered a minor misdemeanor in Chicago. You do not do that. At the new park, it used to be called Packbell Park. Now it's Oracle. On the third floor, they were doing Chicago hot dogs. I think that isn't because of me, but that's another story. And there was a guy in line and you had to go up all the way up to get the Chicago hot dog, and it was Vienna. And someone went to put ketchup on it. You don't do that. Not if you value your life. So you just proved the story. And I will say this is anywhere I go. If someone's from Chicago, we have a conversation that starts immediately. I'm on a bus in Lisbon to go to a museum, and the people there, I asked them something and, an American English. And turns out she was from Chicago, a person I never would have talked to or never met because she was from a different neighborhood. But the fact we were both from Chicago on this bus going somewhere in Lisbon, you would think we were old friends. This is what I've done worldwide. Whenever I hear American English or what I think sounds like it, my opening line is that American English? Well, it worked for Larry Register in Fink's Bar in Jerusalem in 1989, who was the bureau chief of CNN. And I was at his wedding, and it worked for Susie Ackerman in the hotel in Istanbul. And she said, oh no, Colombia. And we're still in touch. And I showed them San Francisco. So is that American English? Sometimes it was Canadian English, but it starts a conversation. So I think if we listen, we observe. But thank you for saying that about connections. I don't know where I would be without my longtime grammar school friends, my high school friends, my sorority sisters, Merle and Lana were here. I think maybe Sharon came. We meet every week, every Wednesday, and tonight we'll meet again. You talk about support teams. We all have them. You just have to nurture them and stay in touch with them.
Well, I think that is a great point to end this wonderful conversation with Susan RoAne. You're a treasure. We appreciate you. Thank you so very much for giving your time on us and regaling us with your stories. So wonderful and meaningful and poignant and valuable. Thank you so very much. President Craig. Oh, by the way, how do people find out more about you? It's SusanRoAne.com.
Yes.
And you can find out more information about Susan and her presentations and her books. Make sure that everybody should have How to Work a Room, and more to come. Thank you, Susan RoAne, here for your time. We love you. Mr. President, over to you.
Thank you, Antonio.
All
Love
right.
it here.
Great job, you guys. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you, Antonio, for both of your input today. What a fantastic interview. And Tony, we'll have this recorded. So if you're interested in coming back and visiting and picking up some of the wisdom that Susan shared today, you can do that on a recorded video. Now, also